A school hallway full of noise, lockers slamming, sneakers screeching against the tile. No one noticed the boy getting shoved until he hit the ground. Blood trickled from his lip, but his grip on his friend's arm didn't loosen. He didn't run. He didn't cry. He just stood up again. "If you want to hurt him," he said quietly, "you'll have to go through me." The bullies laughed like wolves who just found their next meal. Cameras around caught it all. Another day, another victim. But what they didn't know was that outside, sitting quietly in an old pickup truck, was a man who had seen war, seen pain, and knew injustice when he smelled it. Clint Eastwood had stopped for just a moment, sipping coffee and remembering the days when people had a spine. And then he saw it, that one brave boy standing against many. He didn't think twice. He opened the truck door, stepped out, and walked straight into the school as if the walls themselves were waiting for him. And in the next few minutes, everything would change. "Want me to continue? Just say next." Clint walked down the school corridor with calm determination, the kind of quiet intensity that made people pause without knowing why. The bullies were still laughing when he turned the corner. The injured boy stood with his fists clenched, eyes filled with both fear and courage. Clint didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You boys think strength is about numbers?" he said, his gaze cold as steel. The hall fell silent. Even the teachers watching from a distance seemed frozen in place. The lead bully, a tall kid with false confidence, scoffed. "Who are you supposed to be?" Clint stepped closer until the kid could see every line on his weathered face. "Someone who's had to earn respect the hard way." The bully's smirk faded. Clint then turned to the boy who'd taken the hit. "You've got guts, kid, and the world's short on people like you." The boy, still shaking, nodded slowly. Then Clint turned to the crowd. "Every one of you who watched and did nothing, you're part of the problem. But it's not too late to be part of the solution." The silence in the hallway turned into whispers. Teachers approached, principals came out of offices. But Clint didn't stick around for applause. He simply walked away, leaving behind a school forever changed. The boy? He stood a little taller that day, and so did his friend. Say next if you want the story to continue. The news of what had happened spread through the school like wildfire. Students who had ignored the bullying before suddenly started to notice everything. The boy who had been pushed around was now getting nods of respect from classmates he didn't even know. But for him, the real moment wasn't the applause or attention. It was when Clint Eastwood found him again, this time outside the school gates, sitting on the curb with his backpack. Clint sat beside him without a word. After a moment, he spoke. "You stood up when it counted. Not many do that, especially when they're scared." The boy looked down. "I was scared," he admitted. Clint nodded. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing while you're afraid." The boy looked up at Clint, eyes wide with the realization. "Do you think I did the right thing?" Clint turned to him with a slight smile. "Kid, you didn't just do the right thing. You reminded others what the right thing even looks like." Just then, the boy's father pulled up in an old car, surprised to see his son sitting with a Hollywood legend. Clint stood up, gave the boy a pat on the shoulder, and said, "Don't ever forget today. The world needs people who won't look away." The boy nodded slowly, clutching Clint's words like a badge of honor. Inside, something in him had shifted forever. He was no longer just a kid who got bullied. He was someone who had chosen to do what's right, even when it was hard. Say next if you want to keep going. Days passed, but the memory of that moment never faded from the boy's mind. Something had awakened inside him, a fire that no longer allowed him to walk past injustice without speaking up. He started noticing things he once ignored. A classmate struggling to pay for lunch, a girl sitting alone every day in silence, a janitor getting disrespected by spoiled students. This time, he didn't stay quiet. He spoke up, helped, stood by people when no one else would. One afternoon, he gathered enough courage to speak at a school assembly. As he stepped onto the stage, his hands trembled, but he remembered Clint's words. The auditorium fell silent as he shared what had happened to him and his friend. He spoke about fear, bullying, and what it means to be brave when it's hard. Every word he said hit like thunder. Even the principal wiped a tear from his eye. But what no one knew was that Clint Eastwood was sitting in the back row, hidden behind a cap, quietly listening. When the boy walked off the stage, he found Clint waiting at the exit, leaning against the wall. Clint gave him a thumbs up and said, "That's how you change the world, one voice at a time." The boy smiled, not because he had impressed a celebrity, but because he knew now who he truly was. He was no longer afraid. He had turned his pain into purpose. Say next if you want more. The boy's speech became more than just a moment. It turned into a movement. Teachers started rethinking how they handled discipline and bullying. Students who once stayed silent began speaking up. A group of kids, inspired by his courage, formed a small club they called the Brave Ones. Their goal was simple: to protect, support, and stand with anyone who felt alone or mistreated. At first, only 5 kids joined. Within a month, there were 20, then 50, then more. They began organizing lunch meetups so no one had to sit alone. They created a buddy system to pair new students with someone from day one. And every week, they shared real stories of kindness on a school bulletin board, reminding everyone that being good wasn't boring. It was powerful. But the boy didn't stop there. With Clint's quiet support behind the scenes, he took his message to local schools. At each school, the story of that rainy day, the one where he stood up and got knocked down, spread like wildfire. And each time he finished speaking, he said, "Even if no one claps for you, stand up anyway. That's how heroes are made." Kids lined up after his talks, not to take selfies, but to thank him. Many had never told anyone they were being bullied. Some had thought about giving up. His words, simple and honest, gave them hope. And Clint? He never once took the spotlight. He stayed in the background, watching the boy become something even greater than a fighter. He became a leader. If you want the story to continue, just say next. Months passed, and the boy's name began to appear in local newspapers. Not for fame, but for change. Reporters were stunned that a school kid had sparked such a massive cultural shift without anger or rebellion, just with honesty and heart. One day, he was invited to speak at a citywide youth conference. The hall was packed. Students, parents, teachers, even local politicians filled the seats. And standing in the very last row, wearing his iconic cowboy hat low over his eyes, was Clint Eastwood, silently watching the boy he had once helped rise from the ground. The boy stood at the podium, took a deep breath, and began. "I used to think being small meant you couldn't do anything big. But I was wrong. Sometimes the smallest voice can carry the strongest truth." The crowd leaned in, silent, listening. "I didn't become strong alone. One person saw me when I felt invisible. One person believed I was worth standing up for. And now I want to be that person for others." He shared stories of the kids who had joined the Brave Ones, how they'd stopped fights with words, built friendships from kindness, and reminded everyone that courage wasn't about fists. It was about choosing to care when it's easier to walk away. When the applause finally broke, it shook the walls. Standing ovation, tears, smiles, pride. Clint nodded once, then turned to leave, slipping out quietly as always. But the boy saw him. He saw the man who once knelt beside him in the mud, and with his eyes alone he said, "Thank you." And Clint, pausing for just a moment before stepping into the night, gave the slightest wave. One man, one moment, one message that echoed louder than any shout ever could. If you love this story and want to see more like it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so you never miss another powerful story like this one. The school courtyard was filled with noise, laughter, footsteps, and the occasional yell. But none of it matched the sound that echoed when a boy's backpack was slammed to the ground. 12-year-old Ethan stood frozen, watching as 3 older boys pushed his best friend Sam against the lockers. "You think you're a hero?" one of them sneered, grabbing Sam's collar. Ethan had seen this too many times. Most kids would walk away, but not him. Not today. His fists clenched. He stepped forward, voice trembling but clear. "Leave him alone." The bullies turned, mocking him, laughing. One shoved Ethan to the ground. "Mind your own business, loser," they shouted. A crowd began to form, but something unusual happened. No one stepped in. No teacher, no student. Just silence and stares. Until a deep voice cut through the tension like a blade. "That's enough." The crowd parted like the sea. Standing there in a simple coat and cowboy hat was none other than Clint Eastwood. No one knew why he was there. No cameras, no crew, just him. And his eyes didn't flinch. The bullies froze. One tried to speak, but Clint raised a hand slowly and pointed to Ethan. "That boy has more courage than all of you put together," he said. Then he looked at the students watching. "Shame on the rest of you for doing nothing." One of the teachers rushed out, startled to see Clint. But he didn't care. He walked over to Ethan, helped him up, and said something only Ethan could hear. Ethan's eyes widened. He nodded. Sam stood beside him now, wiping his tears. Clint looked at the principal, who had finally appeared. "You better start protecting the real heroes in this school," Clint said, and without another word turned and walked away. Ethan stood a little taller that day. Something inside him had changed forever, and as Clint disappeared from view, the whole school remained silent, as if witnessing something they'd never forget. The next day, everything felt different. The bullies were called into the principal's office, and this time, real consequences followed. Sam and Ethan were no longer invisible faces in the crowd. They were recognized, respected, and even applauded by students who had once looked the other way. But it wasn't about attention for Ethan. It was about the moment a stranger stood up when no one else did. A man whose silence carried more power than 100 voices. Clint Eastwood's unexpected appearance wasn't just a coincidence. It was a lesson, a moment etched in time. Ethan would carry that strength, that courage for the rest of his life. He had stood up for his friend, but someone had stood up for him too. That day, a quiet act of bravery sparked a fire in a school where fear used to live. And it all began when a boy refused to stay silent, and a legend chose to walk by at just the right time. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and press the bell icon so you never miss another powerful story like this one.